we talk again? Okay, anyhow. This week's parsha starts off by saying, it says, Vela Mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem, right? These are the Mishpatim which is placed before the Jewish people. As Rashi points out, this is the source of the idea of the Shulchan Aruch, right? Shulchan Aruch is the Baruch Hu is the Rabbi Yosef Karo's response to this pasuk, saying that you have to make halacha accessible. It has to be understandable, accessible. It's not enough to simply say, here's what you have to do. It has to be clear to people what they're doing and why they're doing it as much as possible, as much as they can. Right? It's not ma'akev. It's not an ikuv to doing the mitzvah if you don't understand what you're supposed to do. But you have to still make the best effort because everybody knows you do mitzvahs better when you understand them. Even if it's a chok. A chok, we still try to understand to whatever degree we can. As Rashi points out in Parshas Chukus and Paraduma, he does a lot of explaining over there about this major chok. Right? This is a chok that they laugh at us because it's not understandable. But let me explain to you anyhow what it's all about. Right, and or as much as we possibly can. So kitikna eved ivri, right? You acquire an eved ivri. Sheshlim ya'avod. He should work for 6 years. V'shvis yetzi l'chav sheyichinam. Right, and the 7th year he goes out for free. Right, classical, typical situation in eved ivri, either because he stole and he couldn't pay back what he took, and this is the way he's going to pay back, or he was too poor to be able to take care of himself, and he sort of hired himself out as an apprentice for 6 years to make money at the same time. Apprentice, but as help, whatever. And he can work for 6 years. In the 7th year, in the Shemitah year, he goes free, right? In bekapo yavo bekapo yitzeh, right? If he came by into himself, his own body, right, just by himself, unmarried, a single person, he goes out that way because the Baal, of course, has the right to marry him off to a shufka kananis because that's part of the halachas over here, which is a discussion to itself, but not for tonight. In Baal Ishahu, right, if he's married to somebody, V'yatsa Ishto Imo, so obviously his wife goes out with him. If he came and already married his wife, the whole ganze Mishpacha moved in, right, for the 6 years, or whatever the case may be, so then they all go together. There's no such havim, it must be some kind of havim, but there's no, they don't stay behind, right? It goes into different halachas about what happens if he wants to stay. Instead, he doesn't want to go out, and the Matzah, and the halachas are all here. It's a very technical section, and in fact, it's one of the few parshiyot you can probably be yotzi both Chumash and Gemara at the same time, if you're reading Rashi. Because basically Rashi is just all the Gemaras of darshing out, all the psukim, it goes in the laws of Nazikin after this. But it's a very, very technical parsha, which is kind of, really disappointing, but coming after Har Sinai, it's kind of like a letdown because, thunder and lightning and Torah being given, all this fantastic drama. Although the Mizbech at the end kind of like lets you down a little bit too over there, like you can't. There's a very important message there too. But to get into halachas of Eved Ivri all of a sudden, so this raises the question, and the Meforshim deal with it, and the Meforshim explain that the first thing you have to realize is that you were once a vadim. Don't forget it was once to be an Eved. Treat your avadim properly. Okay, that's a pshat. But aside from that, it's like this is technical, very, very technical. What are you supposed to do with this? So you open the Zohar, right? This is one of the funnest things to do, so to speak. I mean, I don't know if it's the funnest thing to do, the most fun thing to do, but basically it's like you can't have a better example of how Sod changes everything around and adds a whole dimension and depth to Torah that people don't get in the Pshat, Remez, even on a Drush level. Because the Gemara doesn't ask any questions over here. The Gemara takes it straight head on and deals with the halachas as being spoken about. But you open the Zohar, the very first page of this week's parshah in the Zohar, it opens up into a discussion about gilgulim. This whole parsha is about gilgulim, believe it or not. All these halachas here on a pshat level are talking about ivri. You can't escape that. The pshat's pshat. But the sod of this week's parsha in the beginning over here, and that's the real pshat. Really, even though this is talking about Eved Ivri, and the halachas lemaisa, not today, but in the time of Avadim, right? There are limudim that are lemaisa in the parsha itself. The reality is that this is really talking about gilgulim, and it makes more sense why it followed last week's parsha, because the whole point of gilgulim is tikkun. That is, because Baruch Hu just gave you Torah and mitzvahs, and once we got the Torah and mitzvahs, it was like starting from scratch all over again. Up until we have a chiyuv, right? There was no chiyuv to live by Torah mitzvah. We did it more as a function of Masorah. We weren't doing it because there was a chiyuv to do so. But from Mara, maybe already some mitzvahs were chal. But once the Torah was given, it was like a brand new incarnation. The Jewish people were transformed. We were literally transformed. our neshama was changed at Har Sinai because we required greater access to higher levels of neshama to be able to fulfill all the mitzvahs we were just given. Because the more mitzvahs you do, the more neshama you have to have access to be able to live on a higher level to perform the mitzvahs. Otherwise, you won't relate to the mitzvahs. You won't connect to the mitzvahs. It's saying to the Jewish people that let me tell you what happens if you don't get it right. Here's how you get it right? And if you get it right the first time, fantastic. If you don't get it right the first time, what's going to happen? So that's what this parshah is talking about. So just take a little peek at this parshah over here. And just a little bit of an introduction to the idea, because he starts obviously way back here. But the basic process of gilgulim is like this. The way that it works, and yes, we do believe in it, in case you didn't get that message by now. Because there's still people walking and going, yeah, well, such a God said it doesn't really exist. And no, it's a Masar. And certainly once the Arizal came along and said, this is the way it is, nobody questions it. There's a whole process until the first time you get into this world. Nobody's here for the first time, right? I'm not surprising anybody, right? You all know you've been here a long time. Not this lifetime necessarily, but in the history. Anybody who's here today probably has been here several times. Gilgulim. Reincarnations. There's no new neshamas today. The Leshem says even since Moshe Rabbeinu, there's been no new neshamas. The first time you come into the world in a physical body, and it's not so pashut you come right away, but when you finally get into a physical body for your first incarnation, way back when, then you get only the nefesh, he says. Well, you actually have all levels of soul, as we spoke about before, but you only have access to the nefesh for the first 13 years of your life. If you get it right, you're metak and your nefesh during those first 13 years of your life, which means basically you're a good boy, right? And everybody likes you, and you're what they call goody two shoes, because I don't know what else you could be called to be that perfect, to get to this level. I certainly was not that perfect by my bar mitzvah, far from it, But he says if you get that to the age of 13. At 13, that's the earliest time you can get your ruach, the next level, which is basically Yetzer Tov. Now, it doesn't mean that if you miss it at 13, you miss it the rest of your life. It just means that if you don't get it by 13, and you fix yourself by 14, so you get it at 14. So you fix yourself by 60, you get it at 60. Unfortunately, usually what happens is very often, people don't even do it in one lifetime. But if you were to do it in one lifetime, if you were to get the nefesh rectified in your first lifetime, and you got your ruach, and then you rectified your ruach. And how do you do this, by the way? So the lower nefesh is the level of a siyah, which is the physical world in which we function, which means physical mitzvahs that you actually physically do rectify your nefesh. Ruach is the level of air, speech. So the speaking mitzvahs rectify the ruach. And then the level of neshama, if you're doing it really keseder, by the age of 20, you get your neshama, which is why you get married at that time, tafka. Right, not later than that, ideally, when everything's working out properly. So then you get your neshama, and if you rectify your neshama, by the time you leave this world, you're finished. No more gilgulim, no Gehenna. You're done. You are a rectified soul completely. Your soul may come back again, by the way, but not for you. It will come back in somebody else for them, as we call ibor. It's a different type of gilgul, which we won't get to tonight. But you will not have to come back to rectify yourself anymore. That's the ideal situation that had to happen the first time you were here. The fact that you're here tonight, at this table, listening to the shir in 5771, more than likely means you're not one of those people who got it right the first time.
Are there people who have? Where are they?
I never met one so far. So and I don't really know. I mean, it could be people going back to times of Tanakh. Well, that's not true, by the way. You do find people like Ishai. I don't know. Did they actually come? Like, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu came. He was originally Sheis. He was Hevel. Hevel came back as Sheis, and Sheis came back as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe stands for Moshe Sheis Hevel, right? So he was a gilgul in the end, and that's he's pretty high up there. So if you didn't fix up your nefesh the first lifetime, you're working on it, and Baruch Hashem, you got to 60%. You check your little, soul meter is at 60%. You go like that. What happens? You come back the next lifetime to fix up the other 40%. Now the 60% that you fixed up gets put away in a trust account somewhere, because if you came back with the same nefesh to fix that up again, you'd be starting from scratch and we'd be here forever working on ourselves. So whatever you fix up at the time the clock goes off, it can come back in the next lifetime, but it can't be damaged anymore. It's got to be protected. So at least you're building from gilgul to gilgul to gilgul, okay? So you came back in the next lifetime. You worked on the 40%. By the age of 25, you fixed it all up. Your nefesh is now 100% metukan, takin, right? It's like all fixed up over here. And now you want your ruach. It's a problem. It's a problem because only in your first incarnation can you get them consecutively. If you don't rectify yourself completely in the first incarnation, you cannot get the next level until you die and come back the next time. So a person who fixes up the rest of his nefesh by the age of 25 either has to live on that level and frustratingly the rest of his life, he just won't grow spiritually like he wants to, or he has to die young. And he brings down here, that's the reason why people do die young very often. It's because it's a chesed from a shemayim, that especially if the guy was a good, he was clearly working himself or was a good person, because it was a chesed, because this person's waiting around. Like, and they're waiting him to go to the next level, which he can't do until he dies. So Kosh Baruch Hu takes him early, so he can come back already. He's a gilgul and get his ruach the next time. And the same thing is true of the ruach. He comes back, even if he fixes up his whole ruach in the next lifetime, he can't get the neshama until he comes back in another gilgul. And that's why people keep coming back over and over again. Because basically you're fixing up percentages, plays havoc into Chiyas HaMesim. Because the question becomes, which body gets which part of the soul? Come back for different reasons. Let's skip this part over here. He's okay. So it says, "Kilafami is gilgul lekach as baz zugo." So there's times a person goes back as a gilgul to fix up, for a various in previous lifetimes. You may come back to fix up for mitzvahs you could have done but didn't do, like mitzvahs aseh, which is less charif than doing averas over mitzvahs los aseh. Right? This, by the way, is worth going in detail. Sure to itself. But he says, or a person may come back just to find his zivug. A person may come back as a gilgul just to get his bas zugo, like he lo zach b'shon lekachta, because he was not zocher the first time to find her. So he comes back in another gilgul to find her. Right? Upamim shkvar lekach bazu. There's times, on the other hand, where he actually found his zivug, el shechata be'eza avera, but he did an avera. Right? He had his wife, he had his zivug, but unfortunately he did an avera. He was not mechaper for it. He did not the tikkun for that avera in the present lifetime. He died. Right? He has to come back to rectify the avera he did. Then he only comes back by himself. Sometimes he was married to his zivug, right? But he had to die in order to come back to rectify himself. He may come back by himself, without his wife next time. Right? I'll explain why. As it says by Rav Hamnuna in this week's parshah Mishpatim, al pasuk, which pasuk? In begapo yavo. If he comes by himself. Right? If he comes by himself, that's the pasuk this week's parsha, right? Meaning that he comes in the world by himself. So that pasuk is talking about a gilgul. Not talking just about a slave, but a gilgul. It says, there's times he has a schus. So even though she may not have to reincarnate, his wife may not have to reincarnate. Let's explain why. Right? Nevertheless, as a schus, he's a schus, they'll send his wife back with him anyhow. So in chapter 20 explains the details of that. He says, in his besod v'yetzel imo, and that's the sort of the pasuk, his wife will go out with him. So you have two psukim. I would have liked to spend more time on that part of it. You have two psukim. You have two psukim over here that are from this week's parsha, very technical, that's talking about gilgulim itself. So he says, "B'pamin hu shelo zacha rishona likach basigum," or perhaps maybe the first time he was not zoiche to find his wife, his zivu. Am misbanalo isha lafim basab, but rather instead they find a woman for him according to his merits. B'kol neshamas sheba'olam ein misha tiyeh krova elav hishazu. So in the entire world, whoever he finds to get married to will not be as close to him as this particular person is. Now, for example, it mentions elsewhere, and this is what the Zohar begins with as well. He says there's one fundamental difference. There's a reason why women don't have to reincarnate.